All right, let's jump into something pretty fascinating today. We're going to take a deep dive into Maurice Merleau-Ponty's A Phenomenology of Perception.
Oh, yeah, this is a good one.
Yeah, you've shared some excerpts from the book, and even looking at the table of contents, I can already tell it's going to be a wild ride.
It is.
So we're going to explore how we actually perceive the world around us and how, surprisingly, our bodies play a key role in all of that.
You know, it's so interesting how Merleau-Ponty just flips the script on everything we think about perception. Like, we usually think of it as this passive thing, right? Like,
Yeah.
we're just taking in information. But he's arguing it's much more dynamic. It's a real give and take between our bodies and the world around us.
Huh.
Almost like a dance, you know?
I like that, a dance. Okay, so the book starts by really questioning this whole idea of sensation being like the basic building block of perception.
Yeah.
Kind of makes you wonder, like, can you even experience something like the redness of an apple without taking into account everything else around it?
That's exactly what he gets at. He uses this example like a red patch and shows that you can't just isolate the sensation of redness.
Right.
You know, it's always tied to the size of the patch, its shape, what's behind it. Our perception's already working to make sense of the whole thing, not just adding up these separate little bits of sensation.
Yeah. That makes me think of those optical illusions like the Miller-Lyer illusion with the lines and arrows.
Oh, yeah.
Even when you know that logically those lines are the same length, your eyes are telling you a completely different story.
Yeah,
It's almost like our brains are playing tricks on us, right?
they are. It shows that our perception is not just a mirror reflecting reality. It's actively shaping and interpreting and, yeah, even being tricked by what's around it, by the context. And then that leads to a bigger question. If our perception's not just this neutral recording of what's out there,
Hmm.
then how much of what we see is our minds just making meaning? You
Yeah.
know? I'm sure you've experienced this yourself, how your understanding of something totally changed when you saw it in a different light, a new context.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. That reminds me of that dress that went viral a few years back. The one where people couldn't agree what color it was. It was
Yeah.
like a real world example of how context can just totally warp our perception.
Totally.
But Merleau-Ponty goes even deeper. He challenges the idea that we just associate, like, present sensations with memories from the past to make sense of the world.
Exactly. He argues that recognizing something, let's say a letter or a house, it's not about matching up these individual features like puzzle pieces, you know?
Uh-huh.
It's about this immediate, holistic grasp of what it means, its essence. There's this super interesting experiment he talks about where people are shown these abstract figures, and then they're asked to draw them from memory. And what's wild is they often distorted the figures, but in a way that made them more meaningful, more recognizable. Like our understanding is influencing how we remember more than the actual visual details.
Wow, so there's this active meaning making going on constantly that shapes what we see.
Yes.
It's not just raw data plus memories.
Right.
Okay, on to another big concept, attention. Now, Merleau-Ponty, he's not a fan of that attention as a spotlight idea, is he?
Nope, not at all. The whole spotlight thing, just illuminating pre-existing objects, that's way too simple for him.
Right.
He says attention actually helps to create the objects that we experience. It focuses on certain features, organizes the entire field of how we're perceiving, and in a way, it shapes the very object we perceive.
Wow.
Yeah.
And to describe that whole field of experience, he uses the term phenomenal field, right? It's like how we
Yeah.
experience the world before we even start like consciously thinking about it.
Right. And it's not just a bunch of separate things, but this unified, meaningful whole.
Exactly. Like our attention is constantly sculpting the world we experience, which leads us to maybe his most radical claim, the primacy of the body in perception.
Okay.
He's saying our perception isn't happening in this disembodied mind. It's grounded in our actual physical being in the world.
Okay, so walk me through this a little more. He uses some pretty powerful examples to illustrate this idea, right?
Oh, absolutely. One that's like, so striking is phantom limb phenomenon.
Yeah.
People who've lost limbs often still feel sensations in them.
Right.
Think about that. It really challenges that idea that the body is just passively receiving information. Clearly, there's something much more complex happening. Our body, our lived experience, shapes how we perceive on a very basic level.
That's mind-blowing. Are there other examples he uses to illustrate this, like connection between body and perception?
He also talks about how our basic awareness of space, where we are and how we move, is rooted in our movement.
Like in how we reach, grasp, navigate our surroundings. It's not just seeing, it's feeling, doing, being in the world.
Right.
And he even discusses this fascinating case study of a patient who loses the ability to recognize objects visually. But here's the twist.
Okay.
He can still use the objects perfectly.
Oh,
It's
wow.
like his body has this implicit knowledge that goes beyond what he can consciously see.
That's incredible. It really highlights how our bodies aren't just tools. They're fundamental to how we understand the world. Yeah. But Merleau-Ponty, he doesn't stop there, right? He also sees the body as an expressor of meaning.
You got it. He digs into the connection between gesture and language,
Okay.
suggesting that even before we have words, our movements, our facial expressions, even our posture are a form of language.
Ah,
And it's through our bodily interactions with the world that we develop that capacity for more symbolic communication.
that's fascinating. So it's not just that our bodies shape how we take in the world, but also how we express ourselves within it. It's like our bodies are always communicating even before we have the words.
Precisely. And he calls this motor intentionality. This
Yeah.
idea that our bodies are just inherently directed towards the world, reaching out, engaging, even before we form conscious thoughts.
Okay, so we've covered a lot already, and I gotta admit, this is pretty mind-bending stuff. But I think the biggest takeaway so far is that perception isn't this passive process of just soaking up information. It's this active, embodied engagement with the world where our bodies are playing a way bigger role than we might have realized.
Totally.
It's amazing.
It is. And it's not just about our individual bodies. If we zoom out and look at the bigger picture, this means the world we experience isn't just like out there waiting to be observed.
Right.
We are actively constructing it through our bodies and through our interactions with everything around us. It kind of makes you wonder, if the world isn't just given to us, but something we're actively creating, what does that mean?
Yeah.
How does that change how we see ourselves and our place in all of this?
Wow, that's a really thought-provoking question. It seems like we're just scratching the surface here.
Yeah, and you're in luck, because next time we're going to dig even deeper into Merleau-Ponty's ideas about how we understand ourselves, each other, and the world around us.
I can't wait.
It's going to challenge some assumptions about reality in ways you might not expect.
I'm ready for it. Welcome back to our deep dive into Merleau-Ponty's Phenomenology of Perception. Last time, we started unpacking how our perception is this, active, embodied dance with the world, not just passively taking in information. And we ended on a pretty big question. If we're actively constructing the world through our bodies, what does that mean for how we understand everything else?
Yeah, that's a huge question, and it takes us to some even more fascinating ideas. Merleau-Ponty's ideas really challenge how we think about ourselves, our relationships with others, and even the very nature of reality.
Okay, I'm ready to have my mind blown. So where do we begin?
Well, let's start with how Merleau-Ponty rethinks this whole idea of the self. He rejects this traditional view of the self as like this detached, thinking subject separate from the world. Instead, he argues that the self is fundamentally embodied, like embedded in the world through our physical being.
So it's not like we have a body. It's more like we are our bodies. Our
Yeah.
bodies aren't just tools for interacting with the world. They're like the very foundation of our experience.
Exactly. He uses the term lived body
Yeah.
to describe this embodied self. And it's not just a physical object, but a subject that experiences the world from a unique perspective. It's a center of intentionality and meaning-making.
Okay.
And this lived body is always situated in a specific environment, a world full of meaning and significance, which is where his concept of being in the world comes in.
Hold on. I'm trying to wrap my head around this. Being in the world, it's not just about physically existing in the world, right?
Think of it this way. We're not just in the world like a coffee cup sitting on a table.
Mhm.
We're interwoven with it, connected to it through our bodily engagement. We're constantly moving, sensing, perceiving, interacting. That's being in the world.
Okay, that makes sense. It's a much more active and interconnected way of thinking about our place in the world. So how does this radical shift in understanding the self change how we see other people?
Well, that's where things get even more interesting. Because if we're fundamentally embodied beings, then how we perceive and understand other people can't be based on just seeing them as objects in the world.
It's like we're so used to seeing the world and others in this objective, detached way.
Right.
But Merleau-Ponty's saying we need to look deeper, right?
Exactly. He's really challenging that objectifying way of seeing and
Hmm.
argues for a more embodied understanding of what's called intersubjectivity, like how we connect and relate to other people.
Okay, I'm all for a more connected way of seeing others, but how do we actually do that if we can't just observe them objectively?
He suggests that we understand others through a kind of like embodied empathy. We perceive their gestures, facial expressions, movements, and those aren't just external signs. They reveal something about their inner world, their intentions, their emotions. It's like we're reading their bodies, not just seeing them.
That makes sense. It reminds me of how you can often just sense when a friend is down just by their body language, even before they say anything.
Yeah.
Or like how you can tell a child is excited just by how they move, their energy.
Exactly. Those are perfect examples.
Yeah.
And these bodily expressions are an integral part of those emotions themselves. Like, we can't separate the inner experience from its outward bodily manifestation.
So, in a way, our understanding of others is rooted in our own embodied experience. We're not just detached observers, we're meeting them in the world, sharing a common space, and engaging with them through our bodies.
Yes. And this embodied way of understanding others, this intersubjectivity, has huge implications for how we think about everything from communication and ethics to even politics. It challenges us to move beyond just these abstract principles and engage with others in a more concrete, empathetic way.
Yeah. It's like Merleau-Ponty is giving us this, like, whole new roadmap for connecting with each other. Instead of just seeing each other as separate individuals, we start to recognize these, like, deep, embodied connections we all share. But I have to admit, this is a lot to process. I think I need a minute to, like, let it all sink in.
Of course, it's not every day you have to like rethink the very nature of how you see yourself and others, but this is just the beginning. Merleau-Ponty's ideas go even deeper. Next time, we'll explore what all of this means for how we understand the world around us, and it's going to challenge our assumptions about reality in some pretty unexpected ways.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We're wrapping up our exploration of Maurice Merleau-Ponty's Phenomenology of Perception. And you were right, this is where it gets really interesting. We've been talking about how our perception is tied to our bodies and how that changes how we see ourselves and others. But how does this all connect to, like, the bigger picture, to our understanding of the world around us?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? And Merleau-Ponty, he doesn't shy away from it. He argues that if our perception is so fundamentally embodied, then even our understanding of reality itself has to be reconsidered. It's not just about individual objects out there, but about this meaningful world that we create through our embodied interactions.
Okay, now you're really making me think. So are you saying that Merleau-Ponty believes we're all living in our own, like, little subjective bubbles? That there's no shared reality?
Not exactly. It's a bit more nuanced than that. He's not saying objective reality doesn't exist, but that our access to it is always filtered through our embodied experience. Our bodies are how we encounter the world, how we make sense of it, how we give it meaning.
So it's like we're all wearing these special glasses, our bodies, that kind of shape how we see everything.
Yeah,
And while there's a world out there, we're always experiencing it through our own unique lens.
that's a great way to put it. And because our bodies are different, our experiences of the world will also be different. Think about how someone with a visual impairment might experience a city street compared to someone who can see. Their bodies, their senses, create different pathways for experiencing and understanding that same space.
That makes a lot of sense. It's not about denying a shared reality, but like recognizing that our individual realities are shaped by our unique embodied perspectives. It's like a giant tapestry where we're all contributing our own threads, creating this rich and complex whole.
Exactly. And this idea, it has really profound implications for how we approach everything, from art and science to politics and social justice. Because if we acknowledge that our understanding of the world is always rooted in our bodily experiences, we have to be more mindful of those differences in perspective, more open to hearing how others experience the world.
It's like a call for more empathy and understanding, a recognition that there's no single correct way to see the world.
Exactly. It's a call to be more humble in our claims to knowledge, to recognize the limits of our own perspectives, and to be more open to dialogue and collaboration with others who see things differently.
I think that's a beautiful message, and one that's especially important in today's world where it feels like everyone is so entrenched in their own viewpoints. Merleau-Ponty is reminding us that there's always more to see, more to understand if we're willing to, like, open ourselves up to different ways of experiencing the world.
And I think that's a great place to wrap up our deep dive. Merleau-Ponty's Phenomenology of Perception is a challenging but ultimately rewarding read. It invites us to question our assumptions, to pay closer attention to our lived experience, and to approach the world with a sense of curiosity and wonder.
It's definitely made me look at the world in a whole new light. I'm more aware now of how my body shapes my perceptions, and I'm more curious to understand how others experience the world differently from me.
Yeah, that's the beauty of phenomenology. It's an ongoing exploration, an invitation to keep questioning, keep discovering, keep expanding our understanding of ourselves and the world we inhabit.
Well, on that note, I want to thank you, our listener, for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you've enjoyed exploring the fascinating world of Maurice Merleau-Ponty's Phenomenology of Perception.
Until next time, keep those minds open, keep those bodies engaged, and remember, there's a whole universe of meaning waiting to be discovered right here in this lived moment.